I guess from a Shanghan point of view, if you have a yang disease with a yin pulse, that's bad. But if you have a yin disease with a yang pulse, then that's actually good. And that's when the disease and the pulses don't match. But in one context, it can be viewed as bad, and in another context, it can actually be viewed as good.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological. Sales and marketing. These are two words that used to cause a lot of anxiety for me. Partly because I've spent much of my life self-employed, and so these are activities that were baked into creating a sustainable livelihood. And partly because I was working across purposes with myself because I had a belief system. And that belief system had a bad opinion about money, and it had a bad opinion about marketing. I had concerns about presenting myself and my work in a light that was not true. I wanted to feel a sense of integrity. And I suspect as I look back, there were far too many times when I was failing at my own standard. It's been a long road for me to realize that marketing is really nothing more than clear, authentic communication with a group of people that you desire to serve and have a positive impact on. We all have stories about bad marketing, where somebody was trying to manipulate you into something without regard as to whether or not it was something that you wanted. The seller was concerned for themselves, but not at all for you. No one likes that, and you shouldn't. It's easy to think that bad marketing is what marketing is because it's very hard to recognize when really good marketing is happening to you, because good marketing, it's seamless with what you are already thinking and wanting. Bad marketing feels like an intrusion. Good marketing is more like a conversation where you feel a sense of simpatico. Bad marketing has you leaning back and looking for an exit, while good marketing draws you in, like a good conversation with a friend. Often when we think about marketing, we bring to mind the bad kind, and I'll bet you can easily reel off a handful of terrible experiences that you've had with it. But can you tell me about a time when you were on the receiving end of good marketing? Just like good health feels like nothing but bad health, there's a lot that you can say about that. I know that many of us struggle with marketing our services because we don't want to be that smarmy salesperson. And others of us are uncomfortable because anytime we make an offer to somebody, we also risk the possibility of rejection. Perhaps you're uncomfortable with tooting your own horn, or you might even have opinions about those who are too self-promoting. You don't want to be seen that way. Here's one way that I think you can know that you're on the side of integrity or not. Ask yourself this question. Would your patients still want to come see you if they knew your marketing strategy? If the answer is yes, you're probably on solid ground. All right, friends, let's get into today's conversation on an acupuncturist's favorite topic, channels and points, and this one from the perspective of the early Qing Dynasty. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. And where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Michael Brown, welcome to Geological.
Hi, Michael. Good to hear you. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are at completely opposite ends of the world here. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and you are in
Brisbane, Australia. And I think different times of the day, right? You must be getting close to bed.
Not quite bed, but I'm going to have dinner here pretty soon.
Okay. So it's 5-ish or something like that for you?
It's 5-ish over here.
Okay. Well, I've just gotten up and had breakfast, so.
But it's yesterday.
Yeah, it is.
We're time traveling.
The news isn't great today either, so.
Well, we're going to stay away from that.
Yeah.
So I am delighted to have you here. You are kind of a Chinese language geek, from what I can gather.
I don't know if I would say that. I
Really?
like to read. Well, I like to read a lot of Chinese books. Definitely, I still have a lot to improve with my Chinese language.
Well, we always do. What got you interested in Chinese language in the first place?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting story. Do you teach at any of the institutions, or because I think you do a little bit with the Seattle school? Do you, Michael?
Oh, what I did at the Seattle school was learn Chinese medicine. No, I don't even live in Seattle anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you said Missouri, right?
Right.
Well, there was a guy from Australia who did some teaching in America, I think at the San Diego school, a guy called Greg Bantic.
Oh, Greg Bantic, yeah. He was at San Diego, and then he did wander up to Seattle for... Yeah, he was there for a few years. Yeah.
Anyway, as I was finishing my studies in acupuncture in Brisbane, I was thinking of doing some studies in kind of biomedical science, and he said that I said, how do I know what is true in Chinese medicine? And he said, well, go and study the language and then you can find out for yourself.
Oh, man. What great advice. How do you know what's true in Chinese medicine? What a great question.
I mean, even then, it's still opinion based. In Chinese medicine now, there are a lot of things that I am very skeptical of that people put under the banner of Chinese medicine. And they'll come up with kind of these great ideas that say, oh, this is Chinese medicine, this is this, this is that. And they'll talk about it. But then, they make no references to the Neijing, to the Shanghan Lun, to any kind of classical text, they start out with this premise or this idea, and it sounds great, but then they don't reference anything. This is a big problem in Chinese medicine, I think. And this is why I take kind of my approach, which I call basically a source-based Chinese medicine. And this is where we should be referencing out what our ideas and where our ideas come from. And then we can extrapolate on that as well. But I think because people have been removed from the source text, that they don't understand this process of extrapolation that has happened in Chinese medicine for nearly like the last 1,000 years. Because when I look at early authors such as like Lu Wansu of the Cooling School and Cheng Wuji, who wrote the first kind of commentary on the Shanghan Lun, both of these guys are continuously referencing the Neijing as well, and or the Shanghan Lun as well, more so in Cheng Wuji's. He uses the Neijing to explain the Shanghan Lun. So it's like, these guys 900 years ago could reference and kind of extrapolate the medicine, but here now we are lacking that in the West.
Well, we don't have the cultural background for one. And, it also seems to me, and this is always a bugaboo that I've had. I feel like I struggle with it. I've studied a little Chinese language myself. In some ways, for the same reason I think you've gone into it, I want to see if I can learn something from within the language that might be missing in English. That was sort of what took me in there. But the thing that I've noticed is that sometimes people will reference something, but it seems it's more like cherry picking than really looking at it within some kind of a context.
I think that exists kind of like in the Chinese language scholars as well, is that they'll kind of maybe just pick this one idea and it's like, well, that's what I'm going to base my whole argument on. But then you also don't look at it in kind of the wider context as well. So I think that idea exists in English, but I think sometimes Chinese authors have done something like that as well.
They do it as well. I mean, maybe this is a human trait, right?
I got to say, don't be too humble saying that you did a little bit of Chinese language and translating the Huang Huang's 10-key formula book.
Well, that book was easy.
Yeah. It's still difficult to translate any work like that, I think. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about Huang is he writes in a very conversational sort of way. It's not particularly scholarly. Scholarly stuff, yeah, I think that's difficult. But conversational, I don't know. I mean, for me, I thought I picked an easy book to translate.
I just think the process of sitting down, translating, and then, the question of like foreignizing it or domesticating it, keeping it, what parts do you keep kind of how it should be in the original versus will people understand it in our native language as well? If I recall, the story, were you in like Yangshuo or something like that, and you were saying, I want to translate this or something like that, and someone said, well, why don't you just do it?
That's right.
I remember reading that and thinking that was cool. You just got to start somewhere with translating as well. And every time, you do a little bit of translating and you kind of go back and then maybe you read kind of earlier things and you think, oh, this isn't so good. I should change this up, Well,
I think that's true. Any body of work we do, whether it's translating, writing, painting, practicing medicine, podcasting. I mean, you go back and you look what you did 5 years ago and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, right? I actually put that out in public. But you have to start where you are.
I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think that in terms of physicians, we should be looking at ourselves a year from now and thinking, do I know more than what I did a year ago? Am I practicing better than what I did a year ago? And if not, then maybe you need to kind of think, hey, am I working as hard as I should? Because we should be on a steady incline of improvement, at least in our knowledge and what we're doing in clinic, I think, as well.
I would agree. Absolutely.
And then kind of all aspects of life. I think, whether like you're a musician or something like that, you want to continually improve as well. It's very hard for us to kind of reach the pinnacle of Chinese medicine, that we're kind of foreigners, that we have to, to read things in Chinese as well. So it's definitely harder for us and we have to work harder, but that's okay. That's what we've got to do, right?
Well, I mean, in some ways we have to work harder. In some ways we have it easier Can I say that? I'm going to say that. This may be controversial. In some ways, we have it easier. If you're trying to learn Chinese medicine in China, it's hard to learn Chinese medicine. There's so much zhongxi jiahe. There's so much Chinese medicine, Western medicine sort of squished together. Just trying to learn Chinese medicine by itself can be a bit challenging over there. I don't know the situation in Australia. I know increasingly here in the United States as well, they're trying to squish more Western medicine into it.
That's very much what they learn here in Australia as well. They learn a lot of like the pathophysiology of the Western diseases as well, alongside when they're learning Chinese medicine as well. That's kind of like a difficult thing because on one side you're learning, I guess, like the status quo, what you've been in your paradigm your whole life, and on this other side is trying to like break down all your preconceived ideas, but then they're getting reinforced in these other subjects, so your mind has kind of been torn in two. It's trying to break you down, and then you're getting built up in this other one. So I think it's a difficult scenario.
It is a difficult scenario, and I think another piece you were just mentioning, we learn a lot of pathophysiology. We learn it from the Western medicine side, which can be useful. It's good to know how to recognize very dangerous situations. We also learn from the Chinese medicine side. We learn to look at what's broken, what's diseased, what's not working right. It seems to me, though, that learning how to actually look at and understand proper physiology, to understand how things are supposed to work and to be able to recognize health is kind of missing in education on both sides.
I think like our current textbooks, that they were a good introduction, like Giovanni and things like that. I think they've done great things, but I think if I was going to look at designing a Chinese medical course, that the best textbooks on physiology and pathophysiology are actually by the Paradigm Press, the 5 pathomechanism books. Have you seen those ones?
I have not.
They're translated by Sabine Wilms. These books are they are incredible. They quote a lot of the old kind of, well, not classics, but the books from kind of like the last 900 years, like the Ming and Qing Dynasty works, and they just explain what's going on in the body very, very well, and they give you Chinese references and they break it down very succinctly. The only thing is that they kind of have, I guess, a high entry level in that they're only herb based, and they only give you the herbal formula. That they won't say this herbal formula is doing this or doing that. It's actually working that you already have that implicit knowledge.
Right. You have to understand the dynamic that is being referred to.
But if you can understand the herbs, and then even then, I think it's just like, okay, if you aren't a herbalist, if you can understand the pattern and try and extrapolate your own maybe combination or something like that, they would be really beneficial. They're just very, very, very good textbooks. And I've just been rereading the Spleen one myself as well. So I would think that would be a really good place to start, and to get students kind of used to maybe a little bit of higher level literature as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to step back for just a moment because I want to come back to your Chinese. So you have this conversation with Greg Bantic. He says, basically, if you want to know what's true in the medicine, go look on the Chinese side, see what's in there. So where did that take you?
When I finished up my studies, I went and enrolled at the University of Queensland, which is my state, and started studying a Chinese program there. And look, I mean, I'll be honest, my spoken and listening Chinese are quite bad, especially for someone who studied as long as me. I'm a little bit strange in that way, that I'm much more of a visual person. Even when it comes to music, I tend to write visually. Like I will notate music that I write and think about how will this sound kind of when I look at something visually as well, where the notes go. I don't really hear it in my head. So when people speak Chinese to me, it just kind of goes over my head. But I mean, luckily for me, writing and translating is all kind of visual language, so I don't really need to talk to people that much.
It's true. When I went to Chinese medicine school, they had us learning Chinese every single quarter. The idea was that we would not learn to speak it, but we would learn to read enough that we could get access to source material. And you don't have to speak it to read it.
I mean, I think that would be a fantastic thing, and I think that would be something great for more schools to encourage, is to just have that kind of reading ability. Because I think that even just 2 semesters of learning how to basically read something, you might not grasp the more complex text, but maybe reading, some diseases from a point, or, an entry from a Bensal or a Materia Medica, they're not that difficult. And you might just be able to kind of pick it up and learn from there as well. But that's a really, really good introduction, I think. I just want to come back to this idea of what's true in Chinese medicine. And I think that because when I was in clinic, is that I would hear someone say this, I would hear someone say that. And it's kind of like, well, which one is correct? Even analyzing that question of which one is correct, we need to look at it deeper and say, in which context is which one correct as well?
Well, the context is so important, right?
Yeah. Did you ever hear this kind of quotation float around your school where they say, if the diseases and the pulse don't match, then that's really bad? Have you ever heard that quote kind of float around?
I cannot remember because I've been out of school for 20 years. So I don't remember.
That's kind of something that I would hear float around, but it's kind of, when you look at it, I guess from a Shanghan point of view, if you have a young disease with a yin pulse, that's bad. But if you have a yin disease with a young pulse, then that's actually good. And that's when the disease and the pulses don't match. But in one context, it can be viewed as bad, and in another context, it can actually be viewed as good, right? Because they're looking at it as a sign of young recovery, right? So then in that terms of the quote, we need to kind of analyze, when is this quote correct, in which context,
Sure. Well, I'm thinking about a patient that we had when I was in Chinese medicine school, and he was in his 70s. He enjoyed being frisky with his girlfriend, so he was eating a lot of ginseng. He came to us because he was having trouble being frisky with his girlfriend. And he had this thick yellow tongue coating, and he was eating tons of ginseng. And we said to him, this hot red Korean ginseng that you're eating, lay off of it. And he goes, well, but isn't ginseng supposed to be a good herb? Well, for who and when?
People will say, oh, let's just use tonifying herbs in this context or something like that. But it's, the herb is only good for the person at the right time, as used in your example, right? And that's probably, I guess, one of the big things that, I don't know if you see it in America, but some like pharmaceutical companies or things like that, they latch onto these kind of Chinese herbs and they bring it across and they're like, this is a cure for cold or something like that. And it's just like, well, what cold, what kind of flu signs and symptoms is it? You can't just use that as a catch-all. And in Australia, we have some other people from different modalities prescribing like patent Chinese herbs as well. And it's just like, you got to look at it. Is this the right herbal formula for this person at the right time? And then, if you don't understand it fully, should you be prescribing it? And I would generally say no. But because in Australia, the patent medicines are what we call over the counter, so anyone can buy them, so anyone can prescribe them as well. But you can't make up your own kind of granules or herbal formulas or powders unless you're a registered herbalist in Australia.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code QIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Very similar situation here. And, it's kind of like an appropriation thing, right? People go, oh, Chinese medicine, oh, it does this, oh, here we can just use it in this way. But if you don't understand the nuance, well, at best, it's not helpful, right? And at worst, you're causing harm. But this, to me, is one of the real beauties of Chinese medicine at its root, is that we're constantly paying attention to what is the context, what's going on. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it deficient? Is it excess? Who's got the issue? When do they have the issue?
I think even looking at, the 8 principles, or kind of the 6, I guess, variables, has Zhang Jingyue, he was the first person to kind of talk about that, and later it became the 8 principles. So looking at the 6 variables, it's like this interior, exterior, hot, cold. It's not one or the other. Your exterior can be cold and your interior can be hot, or you can have, both interior and exterior cold, both interior, exterior hot. And I think that sometimes in Chinese medicine school, they're teaching us to think it's only one or the other, when we kind of need to look at the whole pattern as well. And then kind of understanding that, the diagnosis can be a little bit more complex than some of these simple books as well. So I'll come back to my Chinese language, right? So I spent 3 years studying in an undergrad, and 1 year was in China at Shandong University. I came back and I was just working. My wife, she's from Thailand, and we kind of were going between back and forth there, so I wasn't really in a position to study. But she came out, and then and when we'd been living together, I thought I want to go back and study. So I contacted my university and spoke to them about doing an honors program. I decided that, I would write a little bit of a thesis. And originally I was going to translate a book called the Chunchu Fanlu, which is it's called something like The Luxuriant Jews of Spring and Autumn by Dong Zhongshu. And
Not familiar with him.
No, he was a very famous Han Dynasty Confucian, actually kind of one of the most famous. They say that something like, he didn't visit his garden for 3 years while he studied, or something like that. He was a very, very rigorous Confucian. But he is kind of seen as the person who combined Confucianism with yin-yang and five-phase theory.
It's kind of a pivotal position to be in.
Well, absolutely. And I think then that this book and the other book, the Huainanzi, which is what I wrote my thesis on, because I was going to translate this book, but anyway, a guy called John Major and someone else, they ended up translating the book, and then the rules are you can't write your thesis if someone is translating that book, so I couldn't translate it. So I decided to write my thesis, which was analyzing yin and yang in these 2 pre-Huangdi Neijing texts. And I think much to the, how would you say, normal thought is that these texts actually show quite different ideas of how yin and yang were portrayed. And in the Huainanzi, which I guess you might say is kind of more of like a Taoist text as well, being that the first chapter extensively quotes Lao Tzu, and the second chapter quotes Zhuangzi, and then the next 3 chapters you have a little bit of stuff about like the seasons and kind of the celestial movements. And then in chapter 7, which is called Jing Shen, which I think is probably almost like the halfway point between philosophy and medicine, where they're talking about the 5 zang and things like that, but it's not quite the 5 zang.
What is it?
They include the gallbladder as one of the 5 zang, right? The heart is actually absent.
I've heard this before, that in Korea, they have a very Confucian bent toward the medicine, and the heart is not included. Because the heart is somehow supposed to be within the relationships of human beings.
Okay. That probably comes back, in my opinion, a little bit to the philosophical text, where they view the heart as kind of the heart-mind. But this idea of the gallbladder being one of the 5 zang, this is my opinion of why it is actually both a fu bao and an extraordinary fu bao, is that it came from this category of where it was 5 zang, so we can't just bring it into the fu bao, so we still need to give this idea that it's still quite an important organ, so we'll make it an extraordinary fu, because it's the only out of the zang fu that is both a zang fu and an extraordinary bao, right? Or an extraordinary fu. All the other extraordinary fus are separate. They are not considered zang fu, only the gallbladder. So that's my theory, was that they had this idea that, it was one of the 5 zang, and so they needed to kind of move it across back into this kind of this system of 12 zang fu, and that was their kind of, how would you say, compromise, I guess.
Uh-huh. So if you have a sense of this, what was their sense of what the gallbladder was about in that time, place, and text? How were they seeing it?
I'm not really sure. I guess that they would just view it as one of the kind of more important zongs, because it's not really part of the digestive tract, even though it is, you know? It's kind of like when, I think it's in like Su Wen 9 or something like that, where they describe about all the digestive organs from like the stomach, the spleen, the small intestine, large intestine, kind of, and bladder and stuff like that. And they talk about the whole digestive tract. It's not really kind of part of that. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
It's one of those historical curiosities.
Definitely. But I mean, that's kind of my theory about how it became one of the extraordinary foods. But coming back to this idea of yin yang, is that in this kind of Taoist text, the Huainanzi, yin and yang appear to be kind of like more on a level playing field, where you need above to have below. You need to have heaven and to have earth. You need this kind of balance, right?
That's kind of the way I think of it. In fact, that is the way I think of it, that you don't get more of one without less of the other. And it's a continual changing of one into the other. And there's always a dynamic motion involved.
I agree. I think that's probably the way that most people look at yin and yang as well.
And that's from the Huainanzi.
Yeah. But in Dong Zhongshu's text, he has this chapter where he basically says that yang is superior and yin is inferior.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I know. And I believe a lady called Robin Wang wrote a text that basically Dong Zhongshu set up kind of like the patriarchy in China for like almost like the 2,000 years.
I was just thinking the same thing with a statement like that.
And they actually say, I think something like, that I think some people blame Confucius for a little bit of that patriarchy, but I think, I might be misquoting here, but I think that it was more like the idea with Confucius was that you had a amicable reciprocal relationship with the husband and the wife, right? That if you weren't a good husband, then your wife shouldn't support you and had right to kind of leave, right? But in Dong Zhongshu's point of view, it's just like, well, no, the husband or the ruler or the young in the relationship was always superior. And he says something like, even if the yin side is superior, they still can't be above yang, So he has a very, very different view of yin and yang as well. And it's not spoken much about, I think, in the West, but I think it played a large part. And I think you can maybe sometimes see parts of that come through in the medicine as well. So I think it's just about having that awareness that these ideas existed. You kind of read it and you think, okay, is yang more important in this context, or is yin more important in this context as well? And then what are the authors' maybe biases here as well? So you can kind of understand that as well.
Sure. I mean, sometimes you look at a person's theory and that just tells you a whole lot about who that person happens to be.
That period of time, China was coming back into a period of stability as well, after, having the spring and autumn and the warring states and even, the legalist Han Feizi, he had a very good system for kind of establishing power, but it wasn't a good system for maintaining power, because I think there's the story of, I forget who the guy who started the Han Dynasty was, right? But he apparently was traveling with a whole bunch of prisoners, but some of them escaped. And in the legalist system, you got a punishment no matter what. There was no ifs or buts. So he said to these prisoners, if you guys follow me and fight for me, I will release you. And so then he actually ended up conquering the Qing Dynasty and becoming the Han Dynasty. So, you kind of have a look at all these different kind of philosophies. And I really think that Chinese philosophy is an important part of the medicine, because one of my beliefs is that really the medicine is painted on a canvas of philosophy. I mean, yin yang, 5 phases, all of these are philosophical concepts, right?
Well, they run throughout Chinese philosophy. I mean, if you're looking at geomancy, if you're looking at fortune telling, if you're looking at bazi, you're looking at the motion of the stars, it all comes down to that.
Yeah.
Right?
So when I was a student, I'm always studying, but when I was a student, I didn't get many answers. Like, when you come into your class, they just put like, the yin yang kind of relationships, the interdependence, the waxing and waning. Where did these ideas come from? What are the actual quotes? And so this is kind of one of the things that I was working on as well, is to come back, find where these original quotes come from, and try and understand the medicine, I guess, in a way that they did back, in the old days, not just taking the message out of the text, but kind of going back and looking at the original context of the quote as well.
Mm-hmm. Have you got some other examples, anything in particular where you've gone and you've looked into some of these quotes and the context and been able to pull something out that helped you make sense of something that you might have heard in Chinese medicine school but never quite understood?
I'm not sure about that one. You put me on the spot.
It's my job.
Yeah. One of the things that I looked at was not so much quotes, but perhaps in Giovanni's book. And once again, I think Giovanni did a lot of good stuff. But in his chapter on the small intestine, he talks about the small intestine having like a mental component or, like an emotional component. He talks about there's two other aspects of it where the small intestine, I think, governs the transformation of matter and separates the clear and the turbid, right? And then it has an emotional matter.
I remember that one. Separates the clear and turbid.
Yeah. It has this other where they say it discriminates something like the emotions or something like that. It has this ability to, discriminating capacity and critical appraisal for the small intestine. That quote is never in any Chinese book. But I think the way that he did it was he extrapolated it from the small intestine's ability to separate clear and turbid, but he doesn't state that this is his own creation, right? So I think that's a little bit of a dangerous idea in Chinese medicine, where you don't state that this is my own idea or my own extrapolation, and you kind of put it in that this is in the canons, right?
Well, we were talking earlier in the conversation that, yes, sometimes we cherry pick. We have an idea, we grab another idea from somewhere, ideally an old text, and go, look, see, this is that. And you mentioned that the Chinese do it as well, that it's something I think that maybe we do as human beings in a way. We've got an idea. We want to establish some kind of credibility for that idea. We want to have some kind of ground to stand on to say, it's not just my idea. Look, Zhang Zhongjing said this, right? Or, whoever said it, right? You can pull out a reference from somewhere. So, there is that, and at the same time, because Chinese medicine is so image-based, I mean, sometimes we're really looking at an image of something. We're looking for a resonance of something. And that resonance can carry a huge amount of information if we can understand how to unpack that in a current context. It seems like context is the key to all this stuff.
I mean, I agree. And I think that idea of Zhang Xiang, I love that quote and or that phrase, right? And I think like Zhang Jingyue, he sort of says like the Zhang, it's the internal part, and the Xiang, that's the external manifestations of the Zhang. When you kind of like looking at the lips and the eyes, it's like it's just a way of categorizing and understanding that disease in how you treat it and how you look at it in clinic as well. Is it part of the liver or is it part of the spleen? And it just gives you a starting point on how to treat that. You might think, okay, I've got perhaps no real idea on how to treat this eye disease, but maybe, I know that the liver orifice is the eyes, right? I know that the Taiyang channel starts up at the top of the eye as well. And maybe it's a heat disease as well. And Taiyang having the qi of, being cold and water. Maybe I'll work at the point Zhi Yin, which is bladder 67, to try and draw that heat out of the eye via the channel. But at the same time, I might do, liver 2 because it's the fire point, right, as well. And the orifice is the eye and it's a red hot eye as well. So you have these kind of quotes on your physiology that help you develop your understanding based on perhaps your treatment or points as well. And it's just a start. It might not be the best treatment, but hopefully you can elicit some form of change for this person in the clinic.
Well, I've also heard it said that methods are one thing, but principles are something else. And if you understand the principle of something, you'll figure out the methods. If you're given methods without principles, then you're stuck with whatever that method happens to take care of in that particular situation. Because if you don't understand the underlying principle or mechanism, you're kind of sunk. But if you understand that underlying principle, like you were just talking about, Taiyang channel, it has to do with cold. And so if you need to bring some cold into a situation, You think about that Taiyang urinary bladder. How are you going to use it? Well, you want to look at your situation. It'll tell you.
If I could perhaps rephrase what you were looking at a little bit, is it's not just the principle, but it's like when you read a text, you understand what is explicitly being said and what is implicitly not being said as well. You kind of got to read between the lines. And when I talk to my students about like the Shanghai Lun or something like that, they're like, how do I read it? How do I study it? It's just like, you just got to study at the first stage. And one of my good friends, a guy called Ivan Savala, he helped me a lot study the Shanghai Lun at the start. And it was just like, well, what does this mean? What does this part mean? It's just like you just got to read and accumulate knowledge. And as you accumulate more knowledge, then you actually begin to understand, right? Because it's like, to understand, you have your Guija tongue, right? But then when you read through the text, they'll just say, oh, you have this Guija formula, but you take this herb out, you take that herb out. What's the flavor? What's the temperature of that herb as well? And what's that telling you about that disease in that context? Is it adding, warm, pungent? Is it taking out cold, sour, And then what's that telling you in terms of that disease context? None of that's written in the book, but it's implicit because you should have that base level of knowledge from reading the Shanghai Lun, from reading the Shendong Bensao Jing as well, right? You have these kind of base level knowledge. You can only know these things by reading more. So, and then you go back and you read it and it's like, oh, okay, this is what it means here. This is what it means there. So you're constantly reading and rereading to understand the principles, like you said as well.
It's not so easy, is it?
Oh, no. I mean, for me now, I sort of think that maybe, in 10 years, I'll be a good scholar. Maybe 20 years, I'll be a great scholar. And in another 30, I might be a good physician.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I that whole idea, I mean, we really kind of worship the masters, so to speak, but I'm of the opinion these days that most of us are not going to be masters, but we can be really good, solid journeymen and journeywomen. I mean, we can be really solid practitioners without necessarily being a capital M master. I don't even know what it goes into to be a master.
I just want to be, a good physician. Sometimes I think master is maybe just like being able to see this and saying, look, I've treated this before. This is all the signs are pointing to this. So, 9 out of 10 times, this is going to have a very good success rate. So maybe let's go down this path and see what happens, right?
Right. So here's something that has come up for me in clinic recently, which is if I see something and I know how to treat it, or I think I know how to treat it, I'm going to go down that rabbit hole because I've already been down that rabbit hole. In fact, I recognize that rabbit hole. I know this situation. But I often don't learn anything new when I do that. I'm actually just repeating something that I've done in the past. I think the really challenging situations are where I'm facing something and I'm really not sure of it. It's like when a treatment goes well and I know what to do, I don't really learn anything at this point other than, oh yeah, I know to do this for that. But I think where the learning really happens is when we don't quite know what to do in a treatment. I think the learning really happens when, like you're talking about, you're reading the Shanghai Lun, you're reading the Bensao Jing, or you're reading something, and you're going, what the hell are they talking about? Because you don't have enough context, you don't have enough information yet to be able to pull the implicit out of the explicit. That seems to be the place where we really go to school with our medicine.
I agree. The only other situation that I would add is that when you go down that rabbit hole and all of a sudden, I don't know if you guys have them in America, but we have what you call a funnel web spider, where they actually live down these little holes. Okay, well, they're basically spiders that live in, little holes, right? And you think, hey, this treatment should work, but it doesn't. You can't figure out why. And then that's where you're really kind of like, you're scratching your brain. You're thinking, why doesn't this work? It's worked before. What am I missing? What can I read to figure this out? What aspect of the medicine do I need to study and go deeper in to try and figure out this problem as well? Because I think that's one of the other issues is that I know you're not a big Facebook man, but I tend to look at it and read it probably a bit too much for my own sanity, is that people will go on and say, how do I treat this Western disease or something like that? And oh, the patient has got shingles. What herbs should I give her? Or the patient is worried about cancer. What formula should I put her on? It's just like, well, I don't really think that's the that's how we should be treating people as well.
That's not Chinese medicine.
I agree.
I mean, plain and simple, that's not Chinese medicine.
I agree 100%. But how do we change these people back, kind of coming back to Chinese medicine? I mean, in those contexts, it's like, and this is why I think that Dr. Huang is really, really brilliant, because he was just like, well, just treat the constitution of that person as well. Get everything running as well as it should. And then the person, unless heaven inclines them to develop cancer, then they shouldn't develop cancer. Everything should be working well. And if they unfortunately do develop cancer, that's just kind of heaven's destiny, right? You can't cure everyone, but you can try and get people into a good position where they don't.
Yes. Treating the Constitution, I find, if I'm not sure what else to do, usually that is somewhat obvious and some work can be done there. But again, I think we're looking at situations here where sometimes you do want to treat the Constitution. You take care of the Zheng Qi will take care of the Xie Qi. But other times, it's more like you've got to go at what the problem is. Sometimes you'll even sacrifice the Constitution a bit in service of getting the intruder out of the situation.
I mean, that's a really interesting idea, because earlier in the year, I had the wonderful privilege of doing some study with Mazen Al-Kafaji. He came to our national conference that was down in Melbourne, and he did a 2-day workshop on dermatological problems. And his basic principle is, these people have often severe latent heat, and he just needs to go in there. You need to put out that fire, right, before you can supplement anything, right? It's like, are you going to try and extend the deck of your house while the lower floor is still burning?
Put the fire out, right?
Yeah, you're going to put the fire out before you try and extend your back patio, right? And that's kind of his view, right? These people have long-standing diseases, so you need to treat that first, put that under control, and then afterwards you can build them. He's a really, really interesting and great doctor, and very, I really, really enjoyed his classes as well.
Have you got any sort of metrics or thoughts or just ways that you have for yourself in clinic of being able to discern that for yourself? Oh, here's a situation, I've got a fire to put out. Oh, here's a situation, actually taking care of the Constitution should handle that. How do you make those decisions when you're seeing patients?
When we look at, I guess, diseases in Shanghan, right, I think that perhaps the diseases that they wrote and what we see now, when Zhang Zhongjing was writing, I think Taiyang disease would have been more severe than what we see in clinic. Yang Ming, often more disease. Shaoyin, especially more severe than what we see now, right? So then I thought, well, why do these formulas work in our modern clinic? And so I came up with basically, back then they had acute, more severe diseases, and now we have chronic, less severe diseases in most cases. Not all.
I would say the severe diseases are out there. They just don't walk in our office. Yeah.
So most people that we see have chronic, but not as severe as what you would have seen in the Shanghan Lun. I mean, in Shaoyin disease, they might have died in a couple of days, And when someone comes in that we might diagnose with like a Shaoyin disease, they're probably not going to die in a few days, right? We're in a bit of a different kind of period of medicine where we still have these herbs, but they're more chronic diseases. So how do we find that balance? I'm not sure. Maybe ask me in 20 years and I'll have a better answer for you.
Yeah. Well, I think if you had been asking me that same question, I may not be able to give you a very direct answer either, because, I mean, it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, yeah.
At any rate, I want to pivot here for just a moment, because you're doing a book on acupuncture.
Yeah, acupuncture points.
And I would like to be able to talk about that a little bit, because there's already been plenty of books done on acupuncture points. Why do another one? What have you got here? It's something I suspect really has your attention with this.
I'm a little bit strange, if you hadn't figured that out already, is that...
Well, you do Chinese medicine. Of course you're strange.
I kind of like to know a lot about everything. I was thinking about this conversation that we might have and how I might frame it. And when I was younger, when I was really into music and played bands and things like that, I always like to look up, an artist, find out all about their albums, look up the members, find out what kind of bands were they influenced by as well, so I could go back and listen to those bands as well, and I was really into kind of progressive rock. So I would go back, and my favorite band was a band called Dream Theater. And these guys, they grew up listening to like Yes, Genesis, Rush. So I used to go back and I looked up all that sort of stuff, right? And so when I came into Chinese medicine, I started seeing these authors and I was kind of like, okay, who is this guy influenced by? Who is that guy influenced by? What did they write about? What was their style? And I would just go through and I would just read about the authors, what books they read, and then I would go in and I would read the contents of the books as well. So I could kind of understand, okay, this author's talking about this, this author's talking about this, and get ideas about what authors would talk about. I wouldn't necessarily read the book unless I found something really interesting, but I kind of got this idea of a landscape in my head about Chinese literature. And so I came across this book called the Jingxuijie, or as I've translated it, Explanations of Channels and Points. And it was a really, really interesting book because the first thing that I noticed was that it numbered the points. This book was written in, I guess, about 1694 as well.
So it's early Qing.
Yeah. But it numbers the points. So I think
in the same way that we number them?
Nearly identical. I've found a few discrepancies, but everything has been nearly identical to what I've noticed as well. They use the old system with the bladder channel where they kind of come up and they go back up to an earlier number system on the outer bladder channel line as well. But then other than that, they mostly do it, right? But even in translating this book, I actually kind of found out that the numbering system is slightly implicit in the point names, right? And I'll tell you why. Because do you know what the fifth bladder point is called?
Bladder 5? No.
It's called something called like the fifth space.
Okay.
Right? So it's kind of like, oh, you translate this and it's like the fifth space, I guess. So I guess he must have thought, okay, actually the numbering points here are a little bit implicit. So, he started it, he calls it, like Lung 1 and then, Zhongfu, Lung 2, Tianfu, and so forth, and then kind of he numbers all the points. So when I kind of grew up, when I was studying, we were taught that maybe the numbers were more of like a Western invention or something like that.
That was my sense of it. In fact, I found because we didn't really learn the names, later I started looking at the names and found that to be super helpful because sometimes the name would tell you what the point did. Right? So like Ren 11 means nothing to me, but Ren 11 is, when you know its name is construct the interior, oh man, we can use that for digestion.
Yeah. Do you know? And I think Ren 9 is called Shui Fen.
Shui Fen, that's right.
Water division,
so
right?
It's great for water metabolism issues.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? So super helpful knowing the names of these things.
Absolutely. And I mean, and so this book is interesting because it's actually the only received book that I know of that talks about the book that talks about the names and the locations of the point and attempts to explain them. Okay. There was an earlier work by Yang Shangshan, who was the author of the Taisu, and these were works that were discovered in Japan in like 1830 or something like that. And they actually found one scroll of his that he commentated on what they called the Mingtang Jing, or the Classic of the Bride Hall. And that's one of the 3 books that made up the systematic classic of acupuncture, which Charles Chase and Yang Shozhong translated as well. And so this book appears to be a commentary on volume 6 and 7 of the Zhenju Dachang, or the Great Compendium of Acupuncture, which then in itself appears to be mostly from the Bright Hall Classic. Okay? And so this is a text that was written back in the Han Dynasty. And he's written basically a commentary on, why these points treat the diseases that they do. It's just brilliant because he looks at it, from a physiology point of view as well. He says, okay, maybe this is this type of cough that this will treat as well. It's really interesting. And he brings in 5-phase developments as well. So, for example, when he talks about lung 5, he talks about it being the water point, and he says, well, this treats sorrow. And he says the water point treats sorrow because the lung has dryness.
And so by bringing water into the dryness, you're treating the sorrow.
Yeah, that's his kind of physiological idea there as well.
I was looking through. You sent me a couple of pages of the book, and one of the things I found super interesting about it is that, well, the lung, for instance, you start with Tai Yuan, right? Lung 9, the Great Abyss. And, you've got where it's located. You got some things that it does. But what's interesting is you've got some lines in here. There's like heart diseases of the lung. There's spleen diseases of the lung. There's liver diseases of the lung. And when I think about in the Nanjing, where they talk about the different kinds of evils, right? There's the upright evil. There's the, like
vacuous evil.
Yeah, the vacuous evil. I forget all the names.
Excessive evil.
Right.
Yep.
But basically, there's different evils depending on where they are in relation through the 5 phases. And it looks to me like some of that idea is incorporated here in this work.
Absolutely. And when I looked at this, I wasn't really sure how to approach it. And it was actually Leo Locke who helped me say, this is what the model is. And I said, okay, if Leo Locke says it, then it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to debate that with him. I'm 99% sure it's right. And so I was kind of like, how do I get a textual confirmation though? Okay, so first off, in the Great Compendium of Acupuncture, Yang Jizhou, he talks about it in his first volume about the 5 evils as well. Okay. And then there's another text by Wang Ji in about 1517 or something like that. And it's called, Questions and Answers about Acupuncture and Moxibustion. And it's kind of like more of a modern Nanjing, right? And even then he once again mentions, the chapter 49 and 50 from the Nanjing on the 5 evils as well. So from that point of view, I think that you can see this idea of 5 evils was firmly established as a basis for acupuncture as well, and its use in acupuncture. So I agree, and I think once again it's kind of like, it's just this basic idea of why should this point treat these other diseases? If it's a lung point, why should it treat liver? Why should it treat heart? Well, it's all part of the 5-phase system, right? If the lung is in disharmony, it's not, rarely will that lung only be in disharmony. It will have an influence on the other phases.
Of course. I mean, rarely is the lung ill by itself. I mean, this kind of gets back to what we were talking about a little earlier, where other types of medicine practitioners will grab Chinese herbs and go, oh, you can use this for that. Well, because they're looking at just one situation. Maybe the organ itself is diseased or has a problem, but they're not looking at how things actually work through the influence of the different phases and how things are connected to each other.
Well, the question would be, well, did they even take the pulse? Likely not.
Well, if they're not Chinese medicine practitioners, of course they didn't take the pulse.
No. Yeah, exactly, right? Another really interesting aspect of this book, because I'm currently editing the Bladder Channel, right? And the Bladder Channel, it's about 112 pages. So it's a big bopper. It talks in about, I think, Bladder 13, right? The lung back transport point. It has a really, really interesting commentary on it, right? Every now and again, the author, Yue Han-jen, he'll just go into this big kind of rant in a point thing. And I mean, it's cool. It's not much fun to translate, but it's seriously cool when you understand the meaning, right? So he starts talking about the lung transport points, right? And he says, all the back transport points, they all have like a connector to the Zhang viscera. And that's what the word he uses is connector, which is the Shi in Guanxi, right? And so he says this connector, it's kind of like, it doesn't actually access the Zhang, but it connects to the Zhang itself. And then later he says these connectors, they're all in this kind of the fatty membranous tissue in the paravertebral sinews. And I think he says that in like Bladder 31 or something like that. What I think he's basically talking about is he's talking about basically the nerves coming from the spine. He's saying that all these Zhang have connectors, and this is where they are.
You could make a case for this, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, he's saying it's not the actual Zhang itself. They're just a connector that goes to that organ as well. So, I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea early on in the medicine, and I'm not sure kind of how nerves were developed on the kind of the biomedical side, but that's a really interesting idea to kind of say this is just a connector to that Zhang.
Mm-hmm.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
What else about this book got your attention to the degree that you were willing to put all this work into translating it?
When I was originally working on Xu Ling Tai's Shanghan Leifang, or the categorized formulas of the Shanghan Lun, right? And
Did you translate that?
I've done a little bit of it. I've done parts of it, but I haven't finished it.
Uh-huh. Well, please put some excerpts up in the lantern for us, because that's an incredible book.
Like I said, I need to go back and fix some of it up. But that's a good idea. I'll have to look into that. But when I was doing that, I felt that I didn't understand the Shanghan Lun good enough to translate it. So I backed off it. I sort of thought about what did I want to translate, and also what would be beneficial to the field as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where when I came across this book, and it was just like there's just nothing else like it that I've ever seen, and there's nothing else that really, I guess, connects us to a past book that we can use clinically as well, and also that describes the points with the 5 phases as well. I mean, I'm not really a big fan of how people talk about 5-element acupuncture and stuff like that kind of in the modern terms as well. Like, I don't see connections to the classics or anything like that often when they talk about it. So this book kind of comes in and says, bam, this is how it is, and it's from a Chinese author. And I think when you read it, you really see how this guy's knowledge comes through. I mean, he has amazing knowledge of the classics. He has amazing knowledge of the diseases. He's able to kind of correlate diseases as well. Not only that, I mean, in the past, all these diseases would have just been grouped up, right? Has one big kind of fat list. And it's just like, well, how do you remember that? Well, then he comes through and for the yin points, he groups them by organ for the yin points, and for the yang points, he'll often group them by what he calls, originally in the articles, I have it translated as root disease, but we've changed it to principal disease. Because principal, we're kind of looking at it, has more about the principal channel that it runs along as well. And that's often how he'll kind of group that with the disease. But he also might say that this channel treats maybe eye diseases, on the young side, treats eye diseases, or treats the fu bao as well, if it's a stomach or large intestine problem as well. So he takes these big lists of diseases that were originally in these books, and he breaks it down for you. And it's just like, okay, I might not remember exactly what the disease is, but maybe, I know lung 5 treats some heart diseases. So maybe, I'm going to use the water point to treat if there's lung and heart problems there as well. And then maybe I'll go back and read it more as well. But also as well, I think that there's a lot of interesting diseases in there as well. And maybe, people might read it and they might think, okay, I've actually seen something like this in clinic and I didn't know what to do. But then I might be able to use this point for it as well and just see if it works, And I think when I'm in clinic and when I'm thinking about herbs, I tend to try and think of, like a line in the Shanghan Lun or the Jingwei or a formula, and try and think about that reference. But in acupuncture, I don't really have that. I don't really have a connection to a text. So I would like people to kind of maybe be able to think about, okay, in the Jing Shui Jie, it says this, so let's do that, in clinic.
Well, it sounds a little bit to me as well. Again, circling back to some things we talked about earlier in this conversation, that there's explicit and implicit. And especially with herbs, you get your herbal knowledge to a certain level, you get your experience to a certain level. You can look at an herbal formula, you know the diagnosis. You can look at an herbal formula, you know the pathomechanism, because it basically tells you. And it sounds like with this book here, because of the way the author has pulled in 5-phase correspondences, looked at how diseases can transmit from one organ to another, that we've got something similar here, that there might be an issue with the heart. And there's actually a certain kind of physiological connection or a pathomechanism that's going on. And he's cluing you into what that is. So you can not just take the point and treat it, but you can see if maybe that dynamic is actually unfolding in your patient.
I think the saddest thing about this is that the author had another maybe like 7 or 8 books, but they're all lost. We don't have any more of his works, which is such a great shame.
It's a bummer when they don't back it up on the hard drive, I'm telling you.
Man, you know, hadn't he heard of Google Drive? Anyway.
It's amazing how much has been lost and has to be rediscovered.
Well, he wrote like a commentary. I assume it's a commentary on the Suen and the Ling Shu. He also wrote a book about the, has a rough translation, miraculous ancient acupuncture prescriptions as well. And so this is another thing that kind of like reading this, I thought about when we were at school, right? When you were in clinic, did you come up with your own herbal formulas? Or did you tend to follow a herbal formula and modify?
We were encouraged to pick a formula and then do modification.
Okay. So why in acupuncture do we not follow any of the prescriptions?
I don't know.
You know, because I'll tell you, Manual of Acupuncture is actually the best source for point combinations I've read across English and Chinese. I've not seen a better book that lists point combinations than that. And it's in English, but no one accesses it as well. You know, I think we almost need a reformation in how we treat acupuncture. We should be learning these classical prescriptions and trying to apply them in clinic, I think.
Much in the same way that we learn classical Chinese medicine herbal prescriptions, understand the dynamic that it's talking about, and then modify based on what we're seeing in clinic.
Why don't we try and bring back these prescriptions and try and use them in clinic and see, you know, what works, what doesn't, you know, how to maybe modify it up from there, because we have such a great list of them in Manual of Acupuncture, but we're not utilizing it. And I think it's such a great shame. That is one of the best books that I've ever read, both in English and Chinese. And anyway, I hope my book will be a good supplement to that as well.
Does your book have point combinations similar to in the manual?
No,
acupuncture? No.
I assume that was written in his other book, unfortunately. That was lost, and you know, it's such a shame. I hope one day someone will find them in an archive or something like that, and then we might have access to them. But I can only hope. You know, I think it's a really interesting field, and I think it's going to develop soon. And I think one of my good friends, Ivan Zavala, he's talking about it. He's beginning to teach a program at a school in Chicago, talking a little bit about, you know, using the systematic classic and some point combinations from there as well. He's a really good both linguist and scholar that's helped me, and physician as well.
I may have to go talk to him. He sounds like an interesting cat.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth your while. He's written quite a few posts as well, and he's very astute. One thing with translating as well is that, to me, you've got to have a good team around you as well, I think. For me, I have a guy called Johann Hausen as well. He's a German-born guy living in New Zealand, but he spent like 8 years in like a Wudang monastery in China as well.
Oh my goodness.
So he's a really interesting chap. We talked and we connected a lot. We have a lot of the same principles about trying to, you know, bring this information out to people and making it affordable as well, so that people can access these texts as well. So he's my first person that, you know, I translate something and I send it to him.
Yeah, it's so helpful having people look over our work that way.
Well, he's not a native reader, so he'll still go through and he'll sort of say, yes, not sure, yes, 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 this is my reading. And then after that, we send it to another guy called Alan Saw as well. And he has been teaching the history for Phil Settles in his program as well. And he's a young guy as well. I think he's younger than me, and just early 30s. He is an incredible, incredible scholar. He often tears my work to shreds, but it makes it better, you know.
It does make it better. Yeah, it's hard. This is hard work to do. This is a terrible question to ask a translator or an author. Any idea when we might be seeing the book?
Look, the aim is end of October
of this year.
Yeah. So
2019.
Yeah. So, look, my original goal was to publish the whole book in one book, which would have been close to maybe 700 or 800 pages. And I thought, look, that just wasn't feasible. So we split it in half. So the first book will be the first 7 channels. So the lung, large intestine, stomach, spleens, heart, small intestine, and bladder. And you're probably looking at about 350 pages there. So it's still a sizable text.
Yes, it is.
Right now, we're just editing the bladder channel, which is the last thing that we have to do as well.
If people want to get some information about this, have you got a website where they could go or some way of being in touch?
Currently, I don't have a lot of information about this on the website, but I do have a blog. It's blog.remedylane.com.au, so as in remedy and lane. Right now, I just post up a little bit of stuff about herbs and formulas, but I'm going to be posting some more stuff about points as we get a little bit closer to the release date to try and, hype it up a little bit as well. But one of my projects that I've started doing is that I think I'm going to pick one herb, and maybe for every week, once a week, I'm going to post up a small translation of that herb from one of the bensals. So this week I did Jurmu, and it was from the bensal Beiyao, and it just translates this author's opinion of it. And next week I'm going to pick a different bensal. And the basic idea then is that to try and expose non-Chinese readers to maybe some how different Chinese authors approach the medicine as well, because they have different opinions themselves. Sometimes they're a little bit more, functional. Sometimes they're a little bit more 5-phase. Sometimes, they have their own opinions. So I think, and for me, it's about just better understanding the herb as well. They're not, perfect translations. They're just a little bit rough, but it's just about putting it out there as well.
Great. Well, I'll be sure to put links to that up on the show notes page.
Oh, thank you. If people do want to read about if they have access to the Journal of Chinese Medicine, you can access one article in there. And that was, I think, in the May issue or the June issue that's just been released. And then there's another article coming out in the Lantern as well, which I believe should be released next month. So there are 2 articles that are in journals if you guys want to read a little bit more on it, but we should be posting some samples soon.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for your inquiry, and thanks for the work. It's so wonderful to be able to have access in English to this old Chinese stuff.
No worries, Michael. Thank you for having me on, and I hope that I haven't disrupted your dinner plans too much. Like I said, I really hope that it should be out, by the end of the year at the latest, and hopefully October at the end of that as well. Just sometimes when you're working on a project, things take a little bit longer, and that's been the whole case with this, but we're making good progress. And I really think that if you guys have any interest in delving a little bit deeper into acupuncture, this will be a text that you will really enjoy.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
No problems. Have a lovely night.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological, or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.